So we're gonna get started. And before we introduce ourselves, we would love to hear about who's in the room. So if you could put in the chat your name, your pronouns, your role, and the city or school district that you're in, that would be really great. And while you're doing that, we'll also introduce ourselves. And so I will start. My name is Alice Lee. I am a senior program associate here at Public Advocates. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm really excited to be with you here today. And I will pass it to Carissa.
Hi, everybody. My name is Carissa. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a law fellow on the local power building team at Public Advocates, and I am working primarily in the Bay Area with West Contra Costa County. Now I'll pass it over to Nicole.
Hey everyone, I'm Nicole Gon-Ochi. My pronouns are she, her. I'm an attorney here at Public Advocates. I live in LA and I'm a parent of 2 LAUSD kids, and I'm happy to be spending a little bit of time with you this evening. Pass it back to you, Alice.
Thank you. And thanks to the folks who started introducing yourselves in the chat. You can feel free to continue doing that as we go through the rest of this training, because we'd love to hear who you are and get to know each other. So today's training is an introduction to the equity multiplier. And the outcomes for today are for everybody to understand the equity multiplier as a funding stream and the focus goal requirements that come with it, and also to understand how to use the equity multiplier as a tool for school transformation. And as a quick recap, starting with this upcoming school year, there are 3 new tools for equity. So the first is the required actions to close equity gaps. The second is required actions for long-term English learners. And the third is equity multiplier funding and focus goals. So we covered the first 2, the required actions, at our last webinar. So if you missed the last webinar, or if you want to review the information again, the link that Carissa put in the chat earlier, the slide deck and the recordings are all available on our website at that link. And so today we're really going to be focusing on the equity multiplier and focus goals. Oops, I realized I didn't change the slide, sorry. So the agenda for today is we are going to be doing a quick grounding and reflection, and then we will get into the equity multiplier. Then we'll have a Q&A session, and then we will do a brief activity with some share outs, and then we'll do our closing and evaluation. So before we kind of get into the weeds of the equity multiplier, we really want to ground in why we're here. And so it can get really easy to get stuck in all of the details, but ultimately our goal is to create schools where all children can succeed. And for us, this really means that we have to work together to identify and address the unmet needs that prevent all students from succeeding. And so we say unmet needs here because everybody has needs, right? But our systems are set up in a way where it automatically meets the needs of some students, but not all students. And so in order to really identify and address those unmet needs, we really want to be building power for our communities to really transform our schools and to create the conditions for low-income BIPOC students to thrive. So just to kind of get us started and to ground us a little bit before we get into the equity multiplier, if you could share in the chat or raise your hand and come off mute and tell us what needs to change at your school for all students and families to be included and to succeed.
Hi, everybody.
Oops, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I went to go leave my baby in the kitchen with my husband so I could answer the question. So I think what needs to change at our school for all students and families to be included and succeed is representation. Honestly, like if I am being the most honest and sincere, it is representation in the sense that I think our students would be more motivated and inspired if they were seeing people in positions that look like them. Because in all the times in my life where I've had big breakthroughs, and I'm a LAUSD student, which is wild to me because I graduated in 2011 from high school. And after learning about the dashboard through series like this and through my superintendent, I got interested and looked at the dashboard of the schools that I attended. And the dashboard in 2024 looks very similar to the dashboard in Lolita still.
Mm.
So I feel like I have such a connection with the students and all of that because I have similar lived experiences, and you can see through the educational dashboards that are showing. So therefore, I'm able to have more empathy. I'm able to have more compassion. I'm able to like be present, right? And try and connect with the families. But that is not the case for the majority of the staff. And so therefore, I think if our students saw more people working around them that look like them or that has come from similar backgrounds, I think it would make a huge difference to our community, to our school community. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Brenda. That's really powerful and really true, I think, to a lot of folks' experience in this room, that if there were more representation, it would be better all around for families and students in our school. And I also see some folks putting in the chat staff training about the culture of the communities that they're serving, translation for all meetings, focusing on building trusting relationships and providing more training for staff on cultural humility and competence. Yeah, all of these really great, centering relationship building with deep listening and genuine respect. Yes, all really great things to think about. As we think about the rest of this training in the context of that, right? Like ultimately, we're talking about all of this, and so that we can use these as tools to get to these things that we're looking for that will help us change things for students and families at our schools. So feel free to keep sharing those things in the chat, and I will pass it to Nicole.
All right, hey everyone, good to see you all. So as Alice said, like our goal today is really just to provide some information about the Equity Multiplier, which is just one of many tools for school transformation. And just to kind of ground us a little bit, I just want to kind of brainstorm what are some of the other tools for school transformation that we're using, because whether it's Equity Multiplier or something else, all of it is really just to meet these needs that you all have already identified. So another tool for school transformation is the Community School Grants Program, right? Can you raise your hand or make some noise, I guess, or put in the chat if your school or your district received funds from California's $4.1 billion investment in community schools? And I kind of did not do my screen right, so I can't really see you, but thank you for participating in my little poll. All right, and then, okay, now I see some hands and some, and now I can finally see you, I'm sorry. Okay, and then, you know, another sort of tool is directing LCFF funds to school sites in a way that's equitable. So shout out to LAUSD and organizing partners at the Equity Alliance. I don't know if any of y'all are on here, but they have been engaged in a decade-long fight for equity through CENI. So if you're involved in that in LAUSD, raise your hand, or in any other sort of equitable school site you know, strategy to get funds to school sites in an equitable way. Oh, hi, Yolanda. Did you have a comment? Or is your hand just still up?
Oh, you're just brilliant. Keep going. I'm eating myself.
Okay. Thanks, Yolanda, for joining us. And then school site council, the funds from Title I, that's another tool, right, for school transformation. So raise your hands if you've been on school site council now or in the past. We'd love to see who's around. Oh, hi, Angelica. That was like the first one that jumped up. All right, so if you have other ideas of what are some other tools for school transformation, please put them in the chat. But right now we're going to go to the next slide. So now we're going to go right into the Equity Multiplier, which is the tool that we are going to be talking about today. Next slide, please. And so the first question is, which schools are Equity Multiplier schools? So we're going to put in the chat in a second the list of Equity Multiplier schools, and you can check that list to see if any of the schools in your district are getting these funds. But the basic rule is that school sites that are 70% students who are socioeconomically disadvantaged and have a 25% non-stability rate get this new source of funding. And I just want to talk a little bit really briefly in case you're wondering, what do these things mean? So the socioeconomically disadvantaged rate that you see there, that is broader actually than the low income category that's used for LCFF, the local control funding formula. So it includes students who are on free or reduced price meals, but it also includes other students, unhoused students, foster youth, youth involved in or enrolled in the juvenile court school, migrant children, or students where neither parent has a high school diploma. So it is broader than what we're seeing under LCFF. And then the non-stability rate is basically sort of a student transient rate. So it's students that were enrolled for less than 245 continuous days in a school or exited school due to truancy, expulsion, or other reasons. All right, next slide, please. And then we're going to go into all of these things in more detail in a few minutes, but I just want to flag for everyone a couple of the main things that you should keep in mind about the equity multiplier. First, it is a source of funding, but it is not the same as LCFF funding, which many of you may be familiar with. That's the general operational funding that comes every year from the state. It's separate and will be budgeted and reflected separately. It will be in the LCAP, but it won't be sort of categorized in the same way. And this funding is an automatic allocation. So there's no application needed. This is similar to Title I that goes directly to school sites and is based on certain eligibility criteria. And you don't have to apply for it, right? You get it year after year. So that's different from some of the grant programs like the community school program or other programs. And then the next thing to keep in mind that Chris will be going over in more detail soon is that the equity multiplier funds have this accountability sort of provision, and that is the focus goals. So focus goals are required for any school that gets this money, and the goals should be used to close equity gaps. And those are like students in the red in the dashboard at that school. And again, Carissa will go over that in more detail in a few minutes. And then independently, the schools and the district need to look at what are the issues around teacher preparation and retention that might be contributing to the school not serving certain student groups equitably or not meeting their needs. So those are the two things that this funding must be sort of targeted towards. And the last thing I just want to make sure everyone knows is there is an engagement component here. So it requires the school site to engage with students, families, and other interest groups to develop these focus goals, to really understand, okay, so what would work in terms of closing these equity gaps or addressing some of the underlying teacher preparation and retention issues. Next slide, please. So just mention the three things briefly, and I'm going to go a little bit deeper into funding. So if we go to the next slide. So again, equity multiplier is a funding source that goes directly to eligible school sites. The amount is calculated based on both the enrollment and the budget. And the budget was $300 million for this year. And every school site will receive at least $50,000. Go ahead, Brenda. I see your hand.
What does it mean if our school is not on the list?
Yeah, so that means that that school is not receiving this ongoing source of funding. And that's because, like in your case, Brenda, Lolita either didn't have the non-stability rate or the socioeconomically disadvantaged. I think in your case, it's probably the non-stability rate, because I know your rate of socioeconomically disadvantaged students is very high. So yeah, that's why. And because of the eligibility criteria, what you'll see if you look at the list is there are a lot of alternative schools, continuation schools, and virtual schools that are getting funds. So we can talk about that more later, but that's just kind of a flag. Did that answer your question, Brenda?
Yes and no. So does that mean that we are not eligible for it now?
That is right. Yeah. So right now, Lolita will not be getting it. If things change, they might be. but this is not like an application program, so you can't really apply for it or anything. It's just based on those 2 data points around socioeconomic disadvantage and non-stability rate. And so the
Okay.
state just decides every year who's eligible.
Okay, so we would know if we were, because I don't know what non-stability rate means.
Oh, sorry.
Like,
Yeah, so it's basically the definition is kind of complicated, but it's if 25% or more of your students don't stay at your school for the majority of the school year, or if a bunch of them, 25% or more, exit because of expulsion or other things. I forget what all of the things are right now. Truancy, expulsion, or other reasons, if they're like kind of kicked out, basically. Yeah. Okay. And I see your hand, Yolanda. Do you have a question or a comment?
Yes, my question is about Black students.
Mhm.
The Equity Multiplier, there was a whole Black coalition that we fought for money to be directed towards Black students. Did they specify Black students, or did they just use the term low income?
They did not specify Black students. Those are the only 2 things they're basing it on, which is, again, like low income or socioeconomically disadvantaged and the non-stability rate. And I think now that we have the list of schools, we can try to see if it's targeting Black students. I will say for you and for everyone else who's in LAUSD, and I can maybe put it in the chat, that there are about 6 BSAP Group 1 schools that are receiving this funding. So I'm just going to put that in here for you and anyone else who's interested. So these schools that I put in the chat are BSAP Group 1, but that's about as far as I could tell so far in terms of Black students. Yeah. All right. Okay, any other questions? I think, oh, go ahead, Alma.
Just adding to Jolanda's question, as localized, if we support the district to define more their goals of how they're going to use the funding, can it be about addressing Black students and Indigenous students gaps with that? Because my concern is that they're going to use their existing goals, which is not actually including those groups as their way of saying, oh, we're just going to keep enhancing what we already have. Can we, part of our organizing is like, can they do that? Like we asking, hey, let's identify a goal that really targets Black and Indigenous students with this funding. Is it that possible?
Yes, that's definitely possible. And in fact, is required in some cases. And I think that's a good segue to my colleague Carissa's section on focus goals, because we'll talk more about that there. And then if you have questions after she goes over a couple of these slides, then we can definitely workshop those questions. Does that sound good? Okay, go ahead, Carissa.
Thanks, Nicole, and thanks everybody for your questions while we're going through this. Feel free again to just be raising your hands if I'm using acronyms or anything that you're just like, I don't know what you mean right now. Like Nicole said, there is a section about focus goals. So I'm going to be going through 2 different examples to see what kinds of focus goals districts can create, and then what kind of focus goals can we advocate for. It's all going to be based off of, well, part of it's going to be based off of the California dashboard outcomes, and then also on educator issues. Next slide, please. Let me see. Oh, I think in the other direction, Alice, or let me see. Or no, that is on me. Okay, yeah, no, that's great. My bad. All right, so the equity multiplier will be requiring focus goals for accountability reasons, like Nicole said earlier. So now with this funding, districts must include 1 or more focus goals in their LCAP, or the local control accountability plan, for every single school that's going to be receiving equity multiplier funding. Some districts, it's going to be only a couple of schools. Other districts like LAUSD, there's going to be a lot more schools on that list. And so the focus areas must address both of the following. They must address all student groups who have the lowest performance level on 1 or more state indicator on the dashboard. And they also must have a focus goal in the LCAP that addresses any underlying issues in the credentialing, subject matter preparation, and retention of the school's educators, if applicable. Next slide, please. So now we'll go through some of the examples. We have 2 different examples, so we can all kind of see what types of focus goals districts can create. And so next slide, we'll be starting with the California dashboard. So this is going to be getting to some of the questions here of, is there a way that the schools can really just make sure that they are allocating and using the funds in a more targeted way? So this first example is a reflection of the California dashboard outcomes. We chose to highlight Crenshaw Science, Technology, Engineering, Math, and Medicine Magnet School, which is a high school in LAUSD that will be receiving equity multiplier funding. So it looks like they should be receiving around $686,000 in equity multiplier funding this year. And so for readability reasons, we only took a snapshot of the California dashboard chart. If you'd like to see the full chart, it looks like Nicole put it in the chat. That way you'll be able to see how the California dashboard actually breaks down by more student subgroups. Right now, though, again, we just have a snapshot of it, so it's a little bit easier to read on this screen. If you're not familiar with the California dashboard and how these outcomes work, we did give a webinar on it 2 weeks ago, so you can go back and check that out. We walked through the dashboard. We walked through some of the new updates that are going to be in the LCAP as of recently as well. So this new 2024-2025 LCAP will have some updates from the California dashboard to really make sure you can see how to use this tool to really target supports for your students. And so what we are seeing in the screen right now is the California dashboard outcomes, specifically for Crenshaw High School and LAUSD. It is important to know Crenshaw is a BSAP school. So for folks who are not from LAUSD, they had a really big win in creating the Black Student Achievement Plan by divesting funds for school police and reinvesting those funds towards schools that have high concentrations of Black students enrolled. And it's specifically able to provide targeted resources and supports for Black students. So what we have here in the chart, when you look over it, is separated out by the student groups and then these different indicators up on the top. So English learner progress, chronic absenteeism, suspension rate, graduation rate, ELA, math, and then college and career. Just to note real quick when you're going through the chart, so because this is a high school, it's going to say NA across the board for chronic absenteeism. That's not because it's not getting tracked, but it's because it actually is getting factored in on the far right for college and career. Other areas that have like single dashes on it, again, that data is getting collected and it is getting reported to the state. But depending on, so like in ELA and math, you'll see that there's like the dashes instead of a color. That's likely because the amount of students who are in that grade in these specific subgroups are too small of a group. So for privacy reasons, they just don't share this information publicly, but you can always go to your district and ask, you know, how are our foster youth doing? How are folks doing? And you should be able to retain that information. And so when we're looking at this chart, red is going to be the lowest performing and blue is the highest. So ideally, we want to see these charts improving, getting all in the blues and greens. But right now we can see that, you know, there's a significant amount of red for different indicators on the dashboard. And remember, when we're looking at the colors here, and if you're looking at any other school and providing, checking out this information, any schools that are equity multiplier schools must have a focus goal for all the student groups that have the lowest performance level on one or more of these indicators. So there's going to have to be focus groups for each of these areas that are showing up in the red. So I guess just opening it up to y'all again, what kinds of focus goals does this equity multiplier school have to create just based off of what you've learned tonight and what you're seeing up on the board? And again, you can unmute, raise your hand, throw something in the chat.
Why don't you do that?
Well, I think it's really interesting that we've invested 125 million into BSAP, and yet for African American students, we're still at red for English language arts, and we're still at red for math. So my big question is, the equity multipliers built family and community engagement. into their program, but so did the BSAP. And we're not seeing no shift on family and community engagement in 3 years. We're still trying to have parent committees created at Crenshaw High School. I sit on the BSAP steering committee, and the needle is getting darker red. It's going to be black in a minute if we keep this up. So I want to know, what roles can parent and community activists play in the oversight of more money and more money reaching schools, but we're not seeing no shift in the academic achievement and development of our children.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know this is one of those difficult things where it's like engagement is getting built into the process, but then when we actually hear from folks, it's not working that way, right? So this is the first step of it, hopefully being able to find a way, going first, like learning about how this new funding and how to be tracking it. The whole purpose of when these funds, like the way that they dealt it all out, is supposed to be for transparency. So hopefully on like a school site level, it will be easier to track and at least monitor and hold the district and the schools accountable. I know that like through the BSAP program, there's already these levels, right, of tracking and monitoring things. So I know that that is just like something that we're constantly having to really get through. And hopefully, you know, coming out of here, we have some like tips in terms of like way that we can integrate all of our advocacy and engagement just to make it maybe not as heavy as a lift. But it's not, you know, a perfect answer to it. And as you all know, you're going through this and doing all the work and not really seeing the outcomes that you want. I do see here too, in the chat, it looks like the charts aren't translated to Spanish, but the California School Dashboard site does have a translation, right? I believe so. Nicole, does that sound right?
Yeah, I don't know if folks want us to demonstrate, but you do have to do it from the homepage. So, yes.
So the link that we have won't take you there unless if you go to the homepage. The screenshot that we have was just a quick grab that we were able to get. And then I guess, is there anybody else who, when looking at this chart, like any focus goals, any ideas that you can think of, you know, that like, you know, Yolanda said, we're seeing ELA, we're seeing math, like in the red for Black students. Is there any like ideas of what kind of focus goals, if this was your school, if it is your school, like what is a way that could actually help start to improve these numbers?
I'm sorry, I missed your question, sweetheart, Carissa.
Oh, no, you're fine. I was just thinking if anybody else like had any ideas. Thank you so much for like engaging with us and just seeing like when looking at these numbers, if any ideas are coming up of seeing like how can we advocate and make sure that whether it's an engagement issue or just really being able to see like where we're seeing all this red, how can we actually start to change these numbers?
Yolanda, may I ask where are you at?
I'm a LAUSD parent. I'm the vice chair of the Parent Advisory Committee. I'm on the BSAP steering committee, and I sit at the state level for California math, computer, and science. So I'm a parent advocate that kicks their butt up and down this state. That's who I am.
I love that. Okay. So you're not at a specific school.
Yeah, my daughter goes to John Burroughs. So that's the school, highly gifted magnet, 6th grader, middle school.
Nice. Okay, thank you.
And I run NAPI, an organization for Black parents and the Knowledge Shop for Black and Brown students and their families. I'll put my information in the chat for you.
Thank you, yes.
Love it, really doing all of the things. I see also Gilberto, nice to see you here. You said that so much of this hinges on the caliber of the teachers. And we're actually, I do want to answer, I think we have Avelia's hand is up, but we are going to be talking about educator issues as well, Gilberto. So hopefully that kind of like starts to see how all of these things are working together. And Avelia, do you want to come off mute and share?
answering the question is, I would say, parents need to start questioning, what kind of training, teachers are doing, how is the district preparing, the students, to get out of that, red, color.
Mhm. Definitely. And being able to have access to that data, I think is huge too, right? Of just really knowing who the teachers are that are coming in day in and day out to teach your students, but kind of where their qualifications are there. Katie, I see your hand.
Yeah, just in terms of one, really relate, hey, Yolande, to what Yolande was sharing earlier. And I have actually been blessed in terms of the experience in with my kids' schools in East Oakland and some other schools in the flatlands of East Oakland that I've worked with, supported. And a couple of things that I've seen in terms of addressing these kind of issues is one, when there is real collaboration between families, students, educators, both the classified and certificated staff and admin, in the decision-making around resources, some of the things I've seen folks decide to do. One of them is investing in time. So in one school I supported, they had an annual retreat at the beginning of the year and the end of the year, and family leaders were part of that retreat with educators. Not for all of it, but definitely for a real portion of it, where they weren't just there being invited in, but they actually led from the front of the room. And some of what they ended up leading on, besides relationship building and walking folks around their neighborhood to understand the assets and things like that, was actually around teaching and learning. So they created space to do collective planning between family leaders at grade level spans or classrooms to target the particular needs of particular grade levels. So it's differentiated and could be targeted, say, around English language arts or math. And that actually did happen at this school, was at TK8. And then they chose to put money into PD time for the staff. So besides using time before the school year, at the end of the school year, they also structured time in during professional development days in October and in the spring. And they invited the family leaders to co-create workshops for the whole school that were differentiated, so that there could be support at home for teaching and learning, and allocated time for the teachers individually to be able to develop further the work that they were doing in collaboration with those parent leaders. So besides a big room and structured breakouts, they also had additional planning time. And at the end of the day, it had huge impact on reclassification rates, on all kinds of teaching and learning outcomes. So that's one thing I've seen. Another team that I saw at a high school level was actually a 612, chose based on looking at the data together. Again, in this particular case, a lot of youth leaders on the school site council where they had a shared governance team. Looking at the data, they chose to put resources into having pull-out time and additional support for students around the focal groups. And in this case, again, looking at who were those focal groups and investing time and attention specifically for Black students and multilingual learners. So those are two examples I've seen, and the families and the youth did that in collaboration with educators.
Thank you, Katie. Those are two really awesome examples of like things to really make sure, like building that solidarity between families and educators, and really just making sure that young people and their families are in like the every single moment, not just providing input, but actually a part of the decision making. That's huge. Vilia, I see you. You can unmic.
No, that's probably from before, sorry.
Oh, another one. Okay. Thank you. Well, since we are talking about educators, we can, I guess, it'd be a great time to move over to the next slide.
Sorry, can I make one point really quick? Krista, I guess I just wanted to first applaud again, Katie, for those examples, and also go back to Yolande's, I guess, kind of question or concern about you know, what can we do because to really provide more meaningful engagement and accountability for Black students? Because I think I heard you saying, Yolande, that like this doesn't feel like that much new. Like, yes, there's more money, but like we already have like some of these structures and requirements in place in LAUSD through the Black Student Achievement Program. So what's going to be different? And I think that's right. You know, like in LAUSD and in many other districts, there are many rules that are not followed. And also the laws or the rules create a floor and not a ceiling. And so I guess what I would say is that, and this is not anything people here don't already know, but I think all these are just tools, you know, there's just like another opportunity to bring it up, another opportunity to be like, hey, you are failing Black students at Crenshaw still. So what are we going to do differently? You know, we need to do something differently, like what Katie was talking about. Like we need to have something more transformative than whatever check the box thing you're doing with BSAP funds right now. So anyway, I guess I was just wanted to emphasize that that's kind of, you know, a way to use this, and it's definitely not the solution. It's just one other opportunity to raise these issues that we know exist. So yeah, I'll just pass it back to you, Carissa.
Just want to add to what you're saying. You know, when you're a passionate parent advocate and you're not giving up on your children or your community, I think that these webinars and conversations that we have, and I'm learning from Katie's work, has to shift the paradigm. So it's, you know, it's incredible that the state just keeps pouring buckets of monies into schools and school districts, hoping that this will address the problem. But at the core at the problem is that Black children and English learners students and students with disabilities are at the bottom of the totem pole. And so it's not really about money anymore. It's really about how do we shift the teachers, the system that we know is systemically racist and is underpinned by white supremacy, where we have a majority of children of color who have the right to be educated like their white and Asian counterparts, right? Because I'm going to tell you in LAUSD, when I look at the math data of Crenshaw, but I look at the math data of Granada Hills, they do not look red. They look all blue. So they do know how to do it, right? They do know how to do it for certain groups of students. And what I'm saying, if we're going to keep using the term equity, then can we start getting some equity in the schools that are predominantly Black and Latino? Because you can do it in Granada Hills or specific Palisades, then you can start doing it in Crenshaw. And that's what I want to move to. And you know, you listen to white parents who challenge you and put into place all the things that they demand. But if a Black person or a Latino parent challenges you, you see that we're aggressive and abrasive. But we're saying we want the same education for our children as you give to others. And that's why I love having people like you, Nicole and Carissa, on here educating us. And please come back and do this again for the whole of NAPI and my big parent groups. Thank you.
No, thank you. All of that was so powerful. And it's, I think, so awesome to be able to see, like, having this be a statewide, like, webinar, and really being able to hear from folks and see how people are doing, you know, doing the good work in their communities and their districts. And it's so right in the sense of, like, it's, you know, we see the money, and we have some folks in this room likely who their school is an equity multiplier school. So it's like, this is a tool, this is some new funding, but it's really goes a lot deeper than that, like you said, to really appreciate all that you just said and shared. I do want to see, Avelia, is this a new hand up or another leftover?
It's, I believe,
Sí,
for my
disculpa,
parents.
¿puedo compartir algo? Tengo mi mano arriba hace
If I
rato.
may share, my hand has been up for a while, but my hand keeps coming down over and over. Can I share?
Yeah, definitely. And sorry for, I think we're having, we have two different accounts. So I'm sorry if we're missing you here.
I think it's Jessica wanting to say something. She logged in with my sign in.
Oh, perfect. Yes, go ahead.
Jessica.
No, es solo reforzar algo poco más
I
de lo
just
que.
want to back up a little bit more of what Yolanda said. I am looking at the list and I'm looking at my own district in Pomona that has 3 schools. And to begin, the education was not made for us Latinos. It was not designed for us. I am looking at this and all I see is red. And it's not just this school, it's all the schools. All of the schools that you see are in the same space. And we have the money and we say, well, how are we going to put this into place? But if we don't move forward with this, we need to have teachers that are, available and that are also there to educate parents. And if parents are not educated, how are we going to move on? Parents will not understand. Parents will not question. And I know that parents are often working and they don't have the time. But at schools, they already assume that parents are not able to even open an email. Maybe they're not, right? We have a lot of English learners. I'm seeing right here specifically English and math. I have one of my kids in university who came out with a GPA of 4.8. He obtained a grant. Right now I have 5. Mental health and academic who were not able to move on. Why? Because my children were not able to come prepared. It was in the middle of the pandemic. And like my son would say, I know I can log in and I will probably graduate, but I will not be ready to be there. However, he keeps pushing and pushing. He's found support, he's found tutoring, and he's been able to move on. But what he says is that we don't have everything that we need in the district, and the district is not giving everything that they need. And it's truly sad to see this tremendous list. And it's also good at the same time because then we can see, we can identify, and we can ask, what are you going to do? These are your percentages, and we want to be clear that we don't want to see ourselves in that list anymore. We want to get better. And Yolanda is correct. As parents, we're always going to be there. I want to see my district, my school, my children, my students the same way as they do in other schools where there's more privilege, and we don't want to be in red numbers. And I am sorry. I know my hand was probably not visible to you guys.
No sorries necessary. Thank you so much for sharing all that. I was getting confused with the 2 different, both under Avelia. So I'm going to make sure I'm paying more attention to that, Jessica, and knowing that that account is you. So the next time you raise your hand. But...
Mil disculpas, lo que
Yes,
pasa.
I really apologize for that. I ended up erasing all of my emails and I asked someone to please send me their link, and it's my bad, but my name is Jessica Limon.
No worries at all. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jessica. And thank you for sharing that. It's hard when there's going to be a bunch of schools. And of course, I mean, we all know the LCAP report is a very long report to go through and try to see, like, monitor where the money is going, and what kind of programs. But at least with this now, which is more than it's been before, it's going to have to be for every single one of those schools. So if there's a school specifically that you advocate around, or if there's something that you can, at least it can provide like a narrowed focus for you to like be able to zone in on 1 school or 2 schools or just 1 goal, and really have the capacity to be able to monitor it for that year and monitor what types of programs or trainings are going forward. I am going to move us on to the second part of the focus goals, just to be mindful of our time. So this second part, in addition to focus goals that address the needs of the student groups who have the lowest performance level, so based off of the California dashboard, the district must also have focus goals in their LCAPs for equity multiplier schools that address educator issues, if that's applicable. So what we have up on the screen is the TAMO data, again, for Crenshaw High School. TAMO data comes from the CDE reports on teaching assignment monitoring outcomes, or otherwise TAMO. And TAMO data is focused on teacher preparation and assignments. What this means is that they track the percentage of teachers who are fully certificated and trained to be teaching the specific class that they're assigned to. So those teachers who are fully certificated, trained, teaching the class that they're meant to be teaching, they are going to be categorized as clear, which you'll see up on the screen. So on the chart on the left, I'm going to start on the bottom. So we're statewide. It shows that the 84% of teachers statewide are considered clear. So they're considered properly prepared and properly assigned to their classes. In LA, it goes to about 85, so it's a little bit higher than statewide. LA Unified, 84, still in line. But then when you look at Crenshaw, it's at 74, 75%. It's almost 10% below what the statewide average is, what the LAUSD's average is. And so this is showing that only 75% of the teachers that are teaching at Crenshaw are the teachers that are fully prepared and trained to be teaching those classes. The chart on the right then breaks it down. So this is for Crenshaw again. I have it highlighted for ELA. So you'll see here for English language arts, about 65% of their teachers are cleared. So they're fully prepared and properly assigned to be teaching ELA. If we're not going to go back to the chart, but if you remember on that chart, we saw all students were in the red for ELA. Black students were in the red for ELA. Of course, it doesn't always, correspond to it. We'll see in math, 94% is cleared, but it was still all in the red. So this isn't always, the most important data to be addressing these issues. It's also important to note that this data is a year behind. So sometimes it's not the most current information to be working off of, especially if your district is experiencing a lot of educator issues. So it could have looked fine. This math at Crenshaw could have been at 94%. And then this past year, possibly they lost 2 or 3 teachers. And if that's the case, and now they're dealing with vacancies, this isn't going to reflect the actual current issue that's going on. So with that, I also want to flag that basically creating a focus goal on educator issues is not limited to what this TAMO data says. This is just going to be one source that the goals can be based off of. But in terms of the equity multiplier, the scope of educator issues is going to be much broader. So it can address credentialing, subject matter competence, and retention. With that said, if there are any educators in the room or folks are privy to the issues that are going on in their schools, just throwing it out, and we'll do this one as kind of a quicker round. But what are some educator issues that you all are seeing at your school? We're already having some people flagging that, educators don't have the proper PD, that they don't have the proper training. And this is again, through the lens of having solidarity with our educators, not putting this on them, but really just showing how a lot of these issues are from a district or the state's failure to support our educators and in return support our students. So if there's anything that y'all want to throw in the chat, just not kind of some things that you're seeing that you think might be able to be addressed at your school or should be a focus area, you can throw in the chat, you can raise your hand or unmic.
So for someone who sits at the state level on math, I think that this is incredible that I have 93% of my teachers who are cleared and qualified in the subject matter, but our children are are in the red. So just because you have a credential and a qualification doesn't mean that you're able to teach our students in the way that best benefits them to learn and achieve. So I think, we have to go deeper when we're looking at this information, right? So who are the teachers? What's their experience? Are they new teachers? Are they tenure teachers? Are they teachers who use explicit bias, implicit bias? Do they understand what equity framework in math looks like? Are they using common core language, the new frame? I mean, this is obviously just a scan, but I'm really concerned that I'm seeing 93% and then I see red. I'm seeing 64% and I'm seeing red. So we got to look deeper into who are the teachers. And this is not, I think we got to move from people taking things personally to having a real conversation about what does education in 2024 for children of color really look like. I'm just sorry. I just can't keep walking around making excuses. And I just was on a Zoom about the importance of teaching children data science. When I go to Crenshaw tomorrow, I'm going to ask, why do we not have any computer educators in this school when computer science is now at the top of math, computer science, and science, and we don't even have any teachers who are qualified to teach data science or computer science at Crenshaw. What is going on? So yeah, this now begins to unpack the conversation that says this is why our children are not being educated to the level we want. So I'm glad you're teaching us this. I really am.
Thank you. And I'm so glad you're in this space with us. You know, with just like you said, looking at the math at 94, but then seeing it in the red, that this school is going to have to, you know, have focus goals to be addressing both of these issues. But this is to say, like, this is where, like, this is the first step of just understanding then what their obligations are, and then going forward of being like, don't just use, you know, they're receiving $680,000 roughly. Like, don't just use that to maybe just fill these vacancies, but use it to make sure that the people that you're filling these vacancies are truly going to be making an impact in the classes that they're teaching. So thank you again so much. With that, I am going to move us on to the next slide, which are going to just be kind of some like overall tips. So the first one coming out of just understanding, you know, what these focus goals are, what the requirements are, is to use multiple funding sources to fund focus goal strategies. So the equity multiplier funding will probably not be enough to fully fund the strategies needed to close equity gaps and address these educator preparation and retention issues. So it's really going to be important to leverage other funds like LCFF, Title I, community schools, grants, etc. We also know, as we've been discussing today, a lot of times it's not really the funding that is the issue, right? But this is, we know we're seeing it. We have this transparent level of funding, or at least it's supposed to be transparent. So how can we then use this in collaboration with all of the other funds that the school or that the district is receiving? This is also, again, for folks who might have schools that are not equity multiplier schools. Always trying to figure out how you can leverage all of the alternative funds at your disposal to really make sure you're closing equity gaps and addressing these educator issues at a deeper level. Next slide, please. And so our next tip is to watch out for grouping of all focus goals in the LCAP report. If a district has multiple equity school sites, it may create a single goal for some or all of the sites, only if the same student groups at all sites are in the red in the same indicators, so those same outcomes, and or if the sites experience common issues in the preparation and or retention of educators. So for example, if a school district wants to address the preparation and retention issues it's facing at all of their equity multiplier school sites, it can create one focus goal in the LCAP that addresses, you know, a district-wide process in hiring and retaining educators. This likely would be a proper way of grouping it all together, specifically for that one issue, right? And so what you want to look out for, though, is just this really broad focus goal. As Jessica was saying, you know, we have this whole list of schools that are going to be receiving equity multiplier funding, this whole list of schools that are in the red. And so you really want to make sure, though, not only looking at, okay, these schools are receiving these funds because for, you know, the main two reasons, and there's underperformance, but really seeing, you know, are they just doing a district-wide way of saying we're going to use these funds to address math in the district, but not actually looking down, well, no, actually at these schools, the students that are supposed to be getting targeted math are Black students at this school or are English learners. And so just being able to really look out for that, because again, these reports are so long. A lot of the times districts like to clump it all together, and it's supposed to be transparent. It's supposed to be something that y'all can be monitoring and easily following. And you're not going to be able to do that if it's all clumped. So the second the LCAP drafts are coming out, just look out for it, keep your eye out, and then start, you know, calling them out for that. And then next slide, please. And the last slide, little tip, is to include your focus goals, metrics, and actions in your school site plans. So that would be like your SIPSAs or community school implementation plans. This is a way for you to integrate all of your school improvement plans for maximum impact on student experience and outcomes. We're suggesting this as a tip. It's kind of a way to consolidate all of your efforts into one place. But the equity multiplier focus goals or the actions that are created are not required to be included in the SIPSA because it's going to be captured in the LCAP. However, it is something that you could advocate for. You can say we want to have this included. It is with the caveat that school site councils don't have the authority to amend the goals because it's a district, but at least you're going to be able to integrate it all into your school improvement plan. You're going to have it all in one place for consistency. And then you're really going to be in this place of like a collaborative space where you can be engaged in the decision-making process, or at least demand that you are. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Alice, who's then going to talk about this last requirement, which is going to be engagement.
Before you move on, let me just give you an example of what happened just this week. We in the PAC requested that the district LAUSD produce the goal, the action, and the expenditure. They came back with a response from the legal department saying that they were not required to present that to the PAC. So how on earth can we make recommendations on an LCAP where we don't know the goal, the action, or the money? They're just giving us this blanket, just like you just said, this blanket figure. Oh, we're going to spend $1.6 million on CTE. Yeah, but what are you going to spend the 1.6 million on? Is it intervention? Is it career development? Is it community college? Is it dual learning? They are telling us that's way too much work to give you parents all of that. The board doesn't even ask for it. So why should you parents get that present? We shut down the meeting. So they're going to run into difficulties because now the equity multiplier is coming. Do you think parents at school site know how to read any of this stuff? They don't. The majority of them don't know. They sit there, they nod yes to every vote, and they don't know how to question. And then if you're the only one parent who understands this game, they ostracize you and they move you. They pit parents against each other. So this is going to be a real interesting next 6 months in public school education, because this money is going to get lost, and I can't see any way. I'm gonna listen hard for the engagement piece, but I can't. If I'm the vice chair of the PAC of the second largest district, and I'm pretty knowledgeable on this stuff, I can't even see, because you don't even have to discuss the equity multiplier as part of the SIPSA, so they can just put that money anywhere. How are you going to be able to follow it? You're not going to be able to follow it. So the state does the right thing by giving the school districts money and for the money to reach the schools. But at the end of the day, there is no transparency, no accountability, and there's no way you can follow that money. There's no way. It's insane.
So really quick before Alice goes into engagement, I do want to mention that the focus goals that Carissa mentioned, they will be goals in the LCAP. So you should be able to see the money and where it's going. They'll have to update it. And the problem is when they start combining everything and then you're not sure exactly what's happening. But that is also where there's a legal requirement that they have all the schools and the subgroups separated out by metrics. And the advocacy or the organizing piece of it is, even if, for example, they have one big literacy goal, right? For multiple schools and multiple student groups, like advocating for Black students at Crenshaw have specific targeted strategies to support their whatever, like English language arts development. So that's just like a strategy tip, but you're right that we're going to have to really look out for that. And it's actually really sad that happened to you, Yolande, because we filed a complaint against LAUSD on that very issue and we won, and they're still not giving it that information. So anyway, follow up with me separately if you want
Please
to talk
send
about
me
that
that
decision.
complaint. Please send me that complaint.
I'll send it to you. Okay, I'll pass it on to Alice.
Thanks. Before I go into the section, since we just went through all of this, none of this is going to be an instant fix. Like, just to your point, like it's not going to fix everything. It's really more just that so you know that what is like the bare minimum, right? That the district and schools are required to do. But we recognize, especially with the stories that Yolanda and other folks have been sharing, that it's not always so simple, that there is a requirement and they're going to meet it, even if it is the bare minimum. So it is going to require, I think, in many instances, folks on the ground really pushing to make these to make your voices heard. But very quickly, just since we do want to make sure you know the requirements, so this is the last of the 3 buckets that we were talking about, right? So there's the funding as the first bucket, focus goals as the second requirement, and engagement as the third requirement. And so the requirements for the equity multiplier, it does require engagement in the development of focus goals. And so what that means is that for any school that's receiving equity multiplier funding, they're required to engage with community members. And so for us, this means students, families, school staff, community members, and community organizations, right? Like all of the people who make up a school community, really trying to engage with them to understand and develop focus goals to use the equity multiplier funding to meet the needs of the students who have the most needs that are being unmet. And so what we would recommend, as I think Carissa had just alluded to, was that we think that you should really be trying to integrate the engagement for the equity multiplier funds into existing shared decision-making spaces. And so this could be school site council spaces, it could be the community school grants, shared decision-making teams. So like these spaces at your school where folks are already thinking about the changes that you want to make. And the reason we want to do this is because we really want to be consistent and to have all of these different pieces and programs and plans like really speaking to each other and working together across all of these different things in order to get to that broader vision of what we want the school to look like. And so we don't want these things to be in silos. And so that is, I think, we kind of just went over like these 3 components of the equity multiplier and these focus goals, but kind of like we've been alluding to our first webinar around required actions, and it might be confusing to tell the difference between the focus goals and the required actions. So these are both things that happen in LCAP. And so we talked, so just to kind of go over what is, or how these tools are similar and how they're different. So we're going to do that in this chart. And again, these slides are available on our website, so you can have this as a reference later, just because it is confusing. So first, in terms of who is required to do these things. So for focus goals, only schools that receive equity multiplier funds have to create focus goals. But for required actions, and this kind of gets to that piece around, you know, if your school is not getting equity multiplier funds, but is in the red for other things. So any district in the school that has any red performance level on the California dashboard, so that can be red for a student subgroup, red for a school, or red for a student subgroup within a school, any of those instances would require them to create a required action in their LCAP. And then in terms of where these things are, like what level these things have to be created at, focus goals are created for the school level, and required actions are created for the school or the district level, depending on the level at which the performance indicator is red. And then the focus, so for focus goals, we just talked about focus goals are around equity gaps and around educator preparation and educator retention. And required actions are for equity gaps only. And so that's really around the different indicators that are on the California dashboard. And so that's academic performance, graduation rates, college and career readiness, English learner progress, suspension rates, and absenteeism rates. And then in terms of the funding, there is additional funding for focus goals. That's the equity multiplier funding that we just talked about. But we also know that it might not be enough money to actually fund all of the actions under the focus goal. And for required actions, there is no additional funding outside of just the LCFF funding that districts are already receiving. And then engagement requirements, we just talked about this, but so for focus goals, schools are required to engage the school community to develop their focus goals. And those are around the equity gaps and the issues with educator preparation and retention. And then for the required actions, there are no new requirements, but all the existing LCAP engagement requirements apply. And so again, with all of these engagement requirements, this is the floor and not the ceiling. And so we really are encouraging folks to push your schools and districts to really be creating more robust spaces for engagement and move towards shared decision making beyond just like checking the box and like meeting the bare minimum of the requirements. So I think that is the bulk of our presentation. And so we'll open it up for any questions or comments if folks have things that they want to say. Oh, and Angelica points out in the chat that a lot of the schools, or some of the schools that have a lot of red in the California dashboard, might also be getting funding through a different program called Comprehensive Support and Improvement. Gilberto, go ahead.
Yeah, I have maybe two questions. One has to do with the role of the Board of Education, an LEA's board with regard to this. Can they be a way of enforcing accountability regarding how the engagement, for instance, takes place and the quality of the engagement?
Yes. That's the short answer is yes, because the Board of Education in a district is the entity that is in charge of approving a district's LCAP. So a strategy that you could employ is to put pressure on the board members to really make sure that the engagement is robust and that what is in the LCAP is reflective of the engagement that the district has done. So they have the power to basically say, we're not going to pass this LCAP, right? So that's the short answer. I don't know if Nicole or Carissa, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, that's totally right. And one of the other things I would point out is there is a gap, I think, in state law around engagement. Because as Alice said, the school board has to adopt the LCAP and you can pressure them. But if they don't really care, or if they just rubber stamp it, it goes to the County Office of Education. And that's your next level of accountability. And under current law, they're required to do things like make sure the equity multiplier funds are in the LCAP and that they have focus goals. But there's not much that they're required to do around the engagement piece for equity multiplier or for the LCAP in general. And so maybe, I don't know if someone else can find the, or I can drop this in the chat in a minute, but we did have some recommendations in a report we released last year around the LCAP around, what could be done to increase accountability for engagement? Because right now the county offices of education have very little teeth to use. Maybe that's not the right term. They have very, very few tools to use to enforce engagement. So this could also be like a state advocacy issue. Yeah, I don't know, Carissa, if you have anything else you want to add.
And
No,
I guess I'm sorry.
Oh no, you're
My
all good,
last point
Gilberto.
has
I'm
to
just
do-
putting. Oh, sorry. I'm putting the report in the chat for you, which I think, Gilberto, it goes down to the nitty gritty. So I do think you'll like it. It'll be in the
Great.
chat. But go ahead, finish your question.
This is not a question so much as a comment about this whole situation of public education. There is really no accountability. The state keeps giving money and setting up processes that the district follows. But if I graduate from high school not knowing how to read, there's nobody whose neck is on the line here. And I think we have to figure out a way to bring accountability to this, where somebody's neck is on the line for that child graduating and not knowing anything in order to live his or her their best lives. And that's the frustration I have with all of this process. The state throws money and there's nothing enforceable really. There's nothing that I can take an LEA to jail for if it's not doing right by the kids. I'll get off my hobby horse. I'm sorry.
Paul?
I'm going to get back on Gilberto's hobby horse. I've been saying that for 10 years. There's no such thing as transparency. There's no such thing as an accountability in any way, at any time, for any reason. These are words, they're empty promises, they're mirages. They sound beautiful and so aspirational, don't they? When you're at a board meeting and the board members are saying, yes, we're being fully transparent or someone is saying, we need more accountability. Oh, yes, we're getting more. No, where you're not getting anything. Stop lying to us. Okay. So then no one ever lost a job because a kid didn't graduate. No principal was ever forced to retire because the kids are far below standard. Okay, they just get moved around, they get promoted. This is civil service at its finest. So let's not pretend there is any of either. And we have to start saying this to people. Go to a board meeting, go to the CDE and say, you know, there is no transparency and there's no accountability. So shut up and stop using those words. Seriously. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Paul. I see Amy, your hand, like to share or have any questions?
Sí, buenas tardes.
Yes, good evening. I am so grateful for everything that I'm learning today. I'm a mother calling in from Anaheim. I speak Spanish and I am just learning, and I am now participating and preparing myself to participate in the LCAP. And because of what I was able to learn in the previous webinar and today, some of my doubts were that I thought we didn't have so many problems, but I have learned that in our district, I am learning that we are in reds when it comes to chronic absences. But now that I see that we need to look school by school, I understand now that my high school, where we are in red, is showing up for math. So I think that this is a great opportunity for me now that I'm preparing myself to participate in the LCAP. I can, ask those questions, and I can be someone who is really questioning. And because as a parent who I don't speak English, I felt like it was a barrier last week that I was participating. And the equity that you guys are talking about when it comes to our language, justice, and the way that we can communicate, it was fearful to me. Who do I talk to when everybody speaks English? Where will I be able to advocate when my language is what is the barrier? But regardless, I'm going to keep being there because I believe that I can make a difference, and I can also motivate other mothers or parents so that we're not afraid and that we know that we can be there and, bring up our concerns and our questions and receive those answers. And I think it's also a really good way for me to be there present. So thank you so much for everything that I have learned and for what you guys have shared tonight.
Thank you so much for that. And I just want to uplift, it's not your language that's the barrier. It's the fact that these systems don't have the proper interpretation and translation services that you're entitled to in place. So it's amazing that you're here. We do have a poll at the end where you can also, if you want to be having any one-on-ones with us, we're offering that on Equity Multiplier, on the California dashboard, and just any LCFF advocacy as well. So please share your information and we can connect that way too. And Yolanda, I see your hand is up.
Sí, sí.
Yes. Yeah, very quickly. I actually did sign up on the previous webinar because I also believe that you guys are going to help me reinforce myself on how I will show up as a participant, because this will be my first time.
Yes, and just to reassure you, we did get that sign up. We're just, we're gonna reach out to folks after this, since we wanted to have everybody from both webinars sign up before we start reaching out to schedule sessions with folks. And I think Mari had their hand up as well. I don't know if Mari is still here or still has a question.
Sí, más que estoy teniendo problemas
Yes,
con
sorry, I'm having a little technical difficulties with my internet. It keeps keeping me out. But I did want to bring up a comment, and truly it's very sad because today we had our meeting today, and where we saw the percentage of students that are actually prepared to move into the university is tremendously low. And it's very, very sad because these districts are receiving a lot of money. We can't say that it's the lack of money, but what we need to ask now is what type of staff do we have within our district? Are they truly prepared? Because there's a lot of money that's coming in, and it's truly sad how our English learners, our Latinos, and our African American community continues to be in red. What do we need to do? We need to go into the schools. Do we need to see how other districts are working and how are they developing themselves and having, their areas going into green? If we just keep only living under red as Latinos and as Afro-American, it's not so much of a question, it's more of like a comment.
Thank you so much, Mari. Yolande. Oh, and also, can you just let us know how to pronounce your name, just in case we're pronouncing it wrong? Yolande.
Perfect, Alice. Yolande, it's French. So we, the nonprofits and parents on this call tonight, need to become organized and collaborative ourselves. It's wonderful that Public Advocate is educating us in this way and giving us the knowledge, but we're the ones who are the parents of the students who attend these schools. And as much as I want to believe the system is going to change, it hasn't changed. In 50 years, we did a report, my little nonprofit, and we looked at LAUSD's math data for 18 years. 100 schools, of which they're all in this equity multiplier, have not made any Black students proficient for 18 years. This isn't new. So we, the parents, nonprofits that work in this field, have to become one voice so that the state understands that we're not accepting you just pouring money, because it's going down the drain. Where most of the money goes in the evaluation that we did in those 18 years was on professional development. So ask yourselves, if we're spending $21 million a year on professional development, why are we all in the red? Why are our schools in the red? We're giving teachers more training. We're giving them more development. They're getting more qualified. I've lived here 15 years. I met teachers when I came here who were new teachers who today they have PhDs and EDDs from all this professional development they've done, but our children are still in the red. So we have to look at this differently. The solutions is that we, the parents, have to become a lot more savvy in the way that we begin to ask the questions. We have to ask, what kind of training are they getting? Who is attending this training? How much money are we spending on the training? And that the training must be linked to outcomes in achievement. It must. You can't just go to training and don't deliver anything to our children. That's not acceptable. So we have to change the way that we as parents advocate for our children in school systems in this country. So I'm encouraging us. I know Nicole's going to share with Paul and I, who's my chair on the call, that lawsuit that was brought against LAUSD. And when we learn from it, we will host a Zoom and train the rest of the parents in what we have learned. So I'm asking you, please, we want to really understand how to shift this paradigm. I think it's parents becoming more knowledgeable and becoming larger in numbers, like the teaching unions, to really take on this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Yolande. And before I get to the next two folks, so I think we're going to take the last two comments or questions from Brenda and Gilberto. But first, I do want to point to this question that Gilberto put in the chat around finding schools that are doing it right. And I hope it's okay to plug this, but like the California Partnership, which we're part of, they do a lot of really, really great trainings where they highlight bright spots across the state where folks are, really trying to lean in and do the work in an authentic way that really involves community. And so I think if you're interested, then you can definitely go on our website and find well, I don't know if it's on our website, but you can look up the California Partnership for the Future of Learning and maybe sign up for their email list as well to see if they have any public trainings that you can attend as well. And I don't know if other folks want to respond to that. I don't know if Katie wants to respond as the person who's in charge of the partnership.
Maybe after other folks have a chance to speak, because I know other hands were up before mine, but I'd be happy to.
And then Brenda, do you want to give your comment?
Yeah, I think I kind of missed what I was going to say, but at the same time too, one thing that just comes to mind from everything that I'm hearing is also like the professional development. You know, it's only being used for the teachers and staff or maybe just teachers. And I think it needs to go into the families as well, right? Like, because again, I grew up in Watts. You know, I had an alcoholic father that was missing in action and a mother like working a job, going back, trying to get her degree because she dropped out of Jordan at 15 because she got pregnant, right? So it's like, how do we expect, I think what we'll find if we look into those schools that are doing it really, really right, that have all their, you know, dashboard in blue, is that their families have financial literacy, right? Like some of these kids, it's really sad to hear when you work inside of a school and talk to the teenagers and realize like some of these teenagers are stressed about like if their parents are going to lose their home, if they have one parent. Like there's all these other factors that come into play. And it's like, how do we expect them to go to school and be prepared and ready to learn when they're like stressing about adult issues, right? Like they don't have the clarity, and they also just went through a pandemic, right? Like something we had never experienced in our lifetimes. And now, you know, they have all the repercussions kind of, they all have like either the PTSD or trauma that just came up from all of it. And I think another thing too is more of our students of color, because I'm from LA, but I relocated to Northern California. And so now I'm at a single school district that's primarily Native American and Latinx. And I'm I'm seeing the dashboard from like my school in Watts, my school in Southgate, and it's looking just like this here. And what I'm also seeing is just like our board does do a great job at representing our demographic. But then I think there's also something to be said of like some of this professional development being poured into our board members, because a lot of them just get like, hey, do you want to join the board, in the board? But then there's no training over the power that they have over the superintendents. Like a lot of the times you're going in there blind and like, here's this person that has all these credentials, that has all these degrees, and they're telling like, this is what I recommend, this is what I recommend. And you're just like, okay, like you're trying to learn and figure it out as you go, and there's no true support. And so you'll have board members not knowing like if they can come in, not knowing if they can ask questions. So I think there's also that power shift dynamic that you need to have that again, like with the superintendents, like there has to be that more accountability, but maybe development for the board members, because some of them may just not know what they can do with their voices, you know? So that's where I'm at with that.
Thank you so much for sharing, Brenda. I think we don't have any more time for any additional comments. We're about to run a little bit over, but Gilberto, since you had your hand raised, if you want to just finish this up.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I just want to emphasize that people need to get into the classrooms. You know, we're talking around the issue a lot, but what is the bottom line is the pedagogy. How is the child being taught, and is the way they're being taught relevant to their experiences? So the parents and the advocates need to get into the classrooms to see what is going on. And that will be eye-opening, because that's where you're going to see how the parents, or the teachers rather, are ineffective, because nothing that they're doing is tied to the particular child that's sitting in front of them. So get into those classrooms, observe them as much as possible. I think that's the way we're going to break this cycle.
Thanks, Gilberto. So I don't know, Nicole, did you want to just say what you were going to?
Oh, yeah, I mean, maybe, I guess since we're almost out of time, do we want to just like move to the last couple slides, and I can kind of, and I'm sorry, Paul and Angelica, that I think we're actually at 7 already. So if you want to put your comments in the chat, that would be great.
Aw.
Oh, sorry, can we move the slides, Alice? Okay, awesome. So just really quick in closing, really appreciated all of the really honest, sharing, the vulnerable and authentic sharing tonight. It was really moving actually to be in such a big statewide space where most people don't know each other, and to feel like it was actually kind of an intimate space. So thank you all so much for that. I think just wanted to emphasize a couple of things. One is, again, this is just a tool, one of many tools, and it's not enough, but it's something we can use because that's what we do, right? We use those tools that are at our disposal to fight and continue to fight for racial justice and equity in our schools. And I also want to say, I know that I've heard a lot tonight, a lot of really honest comments about the shortcomings of funding, the shortcomings of maybe like how things are happening in the classroom. And those are all true. And at the same time, just want to emphasize that we do need funding, and we have a lot of funding, but it's still not enough. We're still actually not at adequate funding in California. And that we need to, totally to Yolanda's point about families and students and community organizations coming together. That's so powerful. And I think we also need to come together with our educators, because to Gilberto's point, it is the educators too that know really what's happening in the classroom. And to find those educators who are totally on the same page, really want to see the change in their classrooms and with the students that they teach, like that's the most powerful coalition. So really hoping that that we can have a broad and expansive one, and looking forward to working with all of you in that. So I'm not going to go over this slide. This is just a timeline, but you can look at it later. And if we go to the next slide. I don't think I really need to go over this either, but again, just like new stream of funding to certain schools, ongoing, that's what the equity multiplier is. Like, if you're working on school site organizing, integrating it into your school site plans, and if you're at a community school with the community school plans, and really trying to be holistic about it. And then for like Brenda or anyone else who's like at schools where you're not receiving equity multiplier funding, you can still leverage the required actions and sort of that tool that gives you an opportunity to say, hey, what are we doing for these specific students on these specific areas? And using that as a platform to advocate for student needs. So once again, thank you so much, everyone, for coming tonight and for all of your sharing. We're going to put a feedback survey in. If you could just fill it out. It should only take a minute or two. I know we're already over. Oh, sorry, I forgot. We're not putting it in the chat. You're going to answer it now. So if you can fill out this this feedback survey, and then let us know if you want to do any one-to-ones on anything. We really appreciate you coming and appreciate the space. Thanks, everyone.